So I usually just focus on the Trent University land, but since I'm not there right now, I've included a little extra. So while Trent is built on the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe, I'm currently hosting the talk from Waterdown, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. So on behalf of our club, Trent Herpetology, I'd like to offer gratitude to the First Peoples of the land for their care for and their teachings about the earth and our relations. And may we honor those teachings today and every day. So I'm super excited to have you guys here. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Our speaker today is Hope Freeman of McMaster University. And Hope, thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful day. And if you're ready, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I'll just share my screen with everyone. Okay, so just asking, can everyone hear and see me okay? Okay, yeah. Perfect. So my name is Hope Freeman. Thank you so much to Jordan and the rest of the Trent Herpetological Society team for inviting me to speak here today. I'm really excited to be here. And just before I start my talk, I just want to mention a few things. So first is that all of the turtles within this presentation were handled under approved research permits. And I also want to give a land acknowledgement. So the majority of the research that the Ecohydrology Lab completes is within Eastern Georgian Bay, and that is situated along Anishinaabe territory and within Robinson and Huron, within the Robinson and Huron Treaty of 1850 and the Williams Treaty of 1923. So with that, I'd love to get started. So really, who am I? So for those of you who don't know me already, I'm currently a Master's of Science candidate within the Ecohydrology Lab at McMaster University, where I'm completing my Master's of Science looking at the suitability of turtle overwintering habitat within Eastern Georgian Bay. So I am a Mac lover through and through. So I did my undergrad also at Mac and I did my honors Bachelor's of Science in Earth and Environmental Science, and I did a minor in Geographic Information Systems. So I love to plug GIS every time I get the chance. So if you ever get a chance to complete a GIS course or do something in GIS, I highly recommend it because it's a really fun and rewarding skill. So a little fun fact about me and my undergrad is that I went to Mac for math and stats. My original goal was to be a biostatistician, so I would combine math and bio and make a career out of that. But after my first semester, I really decided that that wasn't for me, and I really loved all things like outdoors, so that's why I transitioned to Earth Environmental Science, and I haven't looked back since. So that brings me to my interests, which include conservation, and not just reptile and amphibian conservation, but all conservation in general. I love mammals and birds as well. I don't discriminate. I do have favorites though. And some of my interests include camping, hiking, and canoeing, especially in Eastern Georgian Bay. It's such a beautiful region. If you've ever been there before or haven't been there, I recommend going or continuing to go. And when I'm not outside, I'm in the kitchen cooking and baking. And two fun facts about me. The first is that I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary of being vegetarian. So in 2022, I'll be vegetarian for 10 years. And I have two English Mastiffs. They're brother and sister, and their names are Hazel and Theodore. They're super adorable and very large. So if you hear them bark, or they might pop in the screen at some point, don't be alarmed. And together they weigh about 375 pounds. So it's a lot of dog in and around my house. So with that, I'm going to move on to the summary of my experiences. So really, how did I get involved with herpetology? Well, in the summer of my second year, I worked at Grundy Lake Provincial Park as a park ranger. And Grundy Lake has this really awesome turtle monitoring project. So how it works is during the month of June, when female turtles are coming onto the land to lay their eggs, campers have the opportunity to call a turtle hotline, and this hotline connects the campers with a park staff. And from there, the park staff will come to the turtle and will either follow her to her nest site or wait for her to finish laying her eggs. And then when she's done laying her eggs, they'll cover it with a nest cage. And this is really critical, especially in places like Grundy Lake, where there's a lot of people where there wouldn't naturally be. So there's a lot of subsidized predators. So there's a lot of raccoons, a lot of foxes, due to the fact that there's just a lot of food around. So this puts those eggs at an increased level of risk. And in addition to the predators, there's people biking, there's kids digging in the sand, there's people putting in their tent bags into the ground. So by putting these nest cages on these nests to protect them, it really gives those eggs that leg up that they might not have had before. So from there, after my summer at Grundy, I became obsessed with turtles. And just by, I think, fate, Dr. Chantal Markle came into my second year intro ecology course to give a guest lecture. And she was presenting on her recently defended PhD thesis. And Dr. Markle does, if you don't know who she is, she does a lot of amazing research with turtles. So I started volunteering with her. And then after volunteering with her for a few months, she talked to me about a research assistant opportunity within the McMaster Ecohydrology Lab. And that's really where I met Dr. Mike Waddington. And I have been working in that lab since 2018. And I had the opportunity to do my undergraduate thesis there, and then now my master's thesis. And the one thing that I really like about the Ecohydrology Lab is the fact that the research is completed in my favorite place on Earth, which is in eastern Georgian Bay. So our study region falls within the Georgian Bay Biosphere, and if you've never been there before, it is made up of a mosaic of wetlands, forests, and open rock barrens. It's a really beautiful region, and it provides habitat for over 50 species at risk, including many turtles and snake species. And the expansive rock barrens of eastern Georgian Bay provide key turtle nesting habitats, and the wetlands provide critical turtle overwintering habitat. And what's really unique about eastern Georgian Bay is that these habitats are relatively pristine when compared to southern Ontario. So the fact that these habitats have not really been disturbed by humans, but that doesn't mean that they're immune to the pressures faced. So if you're familiar with this region, definitely the Highway 400 series expansion has the opportunity to really impact these wetlands. So if you've ever driven along the 400 series highway, if you look to your left and you look to your right, you'll see a lot of wetlands. So as that Highway 69 becomes twinned, there's a lot of opportunity to impact that critical wetland habitat. And really, what does that mean for the herpofauna that lives there? Well, I just want to take a step back and say that within Ontario, we have 8 native species of freshwater turtles, and 6 of those 8 species can be found within the Georgian Bay Biosphere. And as you may know, all of them are at some level of risk provincially and or federally. And they're at risk due to a multitude of factors. Turtles are actually at an increased level of risk compared to others due to things like habitat loss, fragmentation, and road mortality. And in addition to that, turtles have a really late delayed, or they have to be really old before they can reproduce. So they have to be between 12 and 20 years before they can start laying eggs. So not only do they have the fact that they have to get out of their wetland and walk onto the land, they have to be really old. And in order to successfully reproduce, they need to choose nest sites that will do that. So within eastern Georgian Bay, these turtles nest in shallow lichen-covered depressions. And these depressions are very different from what is found in southern Ontario. So within southern Ontario, it's really common for turtles to nest on things like beaches, but we don't really have those expansively within east. Sorry, my dog is whining a lot. I'm just gonna open the door so he stops whining. Okay, where was I? So these turtles nest in shallow lichen-covered depressions, and these depressions can really be made up of 3 bedrock morphologies. And really what I mean by bedrock morphology is, what does the bedrock, if you were to take all the soil out, look like underneath? So we found that there's 3 different types: a crevice, where there's essentially the bedrock makes a V, it's on 2 sides; a flat, where you can imagine just the soil on top of something like a dinner plate; and then a ledge, where there is bedrock only on one side, kind of like a step stool. And these sites are really unique because these turtles, when they go onto the landscape, they're faced with this challenge of finding a site that responds to moisture and temperature fluctuations. So in the event of, say, heavy rainfall, it may cause cooling and oversaturation. So these sites may fill up with a lot of water, which may cause the nest to get really cold, or the nest to flood and the turtle eggs may die. But then on the other end of the spectrum, where it's really hot and dry, these nests have to respond to temperature fluctuations because these eggs can get really hot and then dry out and die. So these turtles have this really unique challenge, and that is what I looked at for my undergraduate thesis. And the main goal of my undergraduate thesis was to understand the moisture response of turtle nesting habitat on the eastern Georgian Bay rock barrens. So I feel like that's a really big, long sentence. And essentially what that means is when these sites get wet, when it rains, how do they react? So our main goal was to identify bedrock morphology. So like I mentioned, flat, crevice, and ledge, and the soil depth that responds most rapidly to large inputs of water. And how we did this was we had 27 experimental plots made up of 3 bedrock morphologies, and each bedrock morphology was broken up into 3 soil depth classes. So we had shallow, which had an average soil depth of 5 centimeters, medium, which had an average soil depth of 8 centimeters, and deep, which had an average soil depth of 15 or more centimeters of soil. And basically what we did was we delivered large amounts of water over a 12-minute period and took multiple discrete moisture measurements following watering. So post-watering, we had this really long moisture probe, and we inserted it into this, this experimental plot multiple times up to 24 hours post-watering. And really, what did this study tell us? What did we find? Well, the first thing is we found that 20-liter pails of water are very heavy. So if you ever decide to do an irrigation system experiment, do so close to a water body because they can get really heavy carrying them around the landscape. But also bringing it back, we found that deep crevices respond faster to moisture, and that may help prevent oversaturation and desiccation. So really, why is that important? Well, that is really important because in the event of a large landscape level disturbance, such as a wildfire or the Highway 400 expansion series, or even development of infrastructure or people's cottages, there may be a need to rebuild these nesting habitats. And using the results from this study, we can more accurately develop these nesting sites so that they can replicate what is on the landscape. Because quite often, the go-to is using sand mounds. And sand mounds, they definitely do have pros, but there are some cons as well. So instead of having a sand mound, which may act as a buffet to predators because it's not really natural within this landscape, we can develop something that looks more natural to prevent that predator buffet. So that was my undergraduate thesis. And now I want to switch gears and also seasons to briefly talk about my master's project. So quite often, a lot of people, when they think about turtles and reptiles, they think about what they're doing in the active season. But reptiles spend, at least within our region at northern latitudes, they can spend over half their lives overwintering. So basically from October to May, these turtles are hunkering down, they're finding a site that will help them survive till spring. So the main thing about turtles is that they primarily overwinter underwater. And they can overwinter in a very large range of habitats, but some examples include marshes, bogs, and fens, and it is different depending on the species that you're looking at. So a good thing to think about is just primarily they're overwintering underwater. And the key thing about these overwintering sites is that they need to provide protection from 4 things. Freezing, so the water temperature has to be warm enough so they don't freeze and die. Predation, so if any of you have seen some of those very cool but sad pictures of an otter going in and pulling a snapping turtle out of its overwintering site and eating it. So they want to pick a site that kind of limits that from happening. Also acidosis. So acidosis is when if the turtles have been exposed to areas with very limited dissolved oxygen for a really long time, they'll basically become starved of oxygen and die. And then finally, desiccation. So desiccation is most common when the water levels will drop rapidly. But it can also happen in other ways. That's just one example. But one example that I think is really helps hit it home for me when I think about desiccation is, say a turtle is overwintering within a beaver pond. And that beaver pond, its water levels are moderated by that beaver dam. But in the event that the beaver dam blows out, say in the middle of January, the water levels are going to drop really rapidly. And then those turtles have the possibility of not being able to move to a new overwintering site because it's so cold and because they're so slow and their metabolism is so depressed that they'll most likely dry out and or freeze to death. So there's a lot of things that come into play when thinking about an overwintering space and how can we really put those all together. And we use a term called the resilient zone. So really, what is the resilient zone? And the resilient zone is the space that optimizes suitability. So there's three main things that come into play for the resilient zone. And the first is stable, cool water temperatures near 0 degrees. So this is critical because the freezing point of turtles is negative 0.6 degrees Celsius, but we don't want them to freeze, but we want it low enough that they can suppress their metabolic activities so that they don't burn through all their energy stores before spring. Sufficient dissolved oxygen. So like I said, we want to prevent acidosis. Some turtles are anoxia tolerant, but the more dissolved oxygen, the better. And also this is really key during the overwintering season because of ice cover. So often these wetlands are covered in ice and they don't have access to aerial oxygen. They can't come up and surface. So choosing an overwintering site with sufficient dissolved oxygen should increase the overwintering site suitability. And finally, substrate to bury into. So that is related to the last comment about ice cover. So say this, their overwintering profile freezes completely, so the water column freezes from the top to the sediment and there's no free water for the turtle to move in. That turtle can bury into the warm sediment to provide temporary refuge from those freezing temperatures, at least for a short period of time. And also substrate is important because, like I was saying, with that otter going in and pulling that snapping turtle out, the substrate may provide some protection or at least some camouflage from predators coming in because they're super cold and super slow, so they have a really hard time getting away. So why is looking at all this important? Well, because turtles are such long-lived animals and because they spend over half the year and over half their life overwintering, we need to understand what makes these sites suitable and what contributes to their success year after year. And very similar to the nesting sites, we need to understand how these function for conservation and management strategies in the event that we either need to recreate it or restore it or even just protect it. It's better to know how these sites function. So that brings me to the main purpose of my master's thesis, which is assessing the overwintering habitat suitability within Georgian Bay Biosphere wetlands. And we want to advance our understanding in the components and processes that control the resilient zone. Because right now, the literature is fairly lacking on field studies to do with turtles with overwintering within like outdoor or within their actual overwintering sites. So with that, I really just started my master's in September. So if you're interested in hearing more, stay tuned. I hope in September, if you go to the THS conference, I'll hopefully be presenting there and I'll be able to give you a few more updates. But before I finish, I want to, I really liked last talk how Ryan gave tons of stories, field stories, and I think that's just such a fun part of the job. So I wanted to wrap it up with a few fun field stories. So I'm going to start off with my very first day as a research assistant. So this was back in 2018, and really the only fieldwork I had done was helping out at Grundy for the turtle project. So I was pretty green, pretty new to this. So it's my very first full day. Dr. Markle and I were getting into a canoe, and Dr. Waddington was there with us. And I was honestly, my breath was kind of taken away, and the words that came out of my mouth were, "This is the best job ever." And since 2018, that has stuck with me. So Mike always brings that up to me. So if you ever have a chance to be an RA, it's definitely the best job ever. And what really the icing on the cake for that day was this massive snapping turtle. So this guy was huge. And what I love about snapping turtles is often you don't see them out basking like on a log. They're often basking, at least in the habitats that I work in, they're often just aquatically basking, except for 1 or 2 days in the spring where they all come out and they're all basking. So this guy was my very first solo turtle that I found within the Ecohydrology Lab, and he was so big that neither Dr. Markle nor I could pick him up. So he's a beautiful male snapping turtle, and he's just such a great memory of my very first day. And then next is my first trail turtle. So if you've ever found a trail turtle, you know the joys of them. It's like a gift from above. So we were at the very far end of our study site, so pretty far hike, almost I think an hour from the car, or from where we park our car. And we were doing some surveys and we found one garter snake, but other than that, we pretty much got skunked, just cute little garter snakes. So at the end of the day, we were hiking back, and this was right around when the bugs were starting to come out. So, you don't have your bug jacket on yet, but they're kind of bothering you. And anyways, we were about a quarter of the way down our hike, and this beautiful male Blandings turtle was just sitting on the trail like this beacon of light. And not only was my first trail turtle, but this turtle really reminded me of how resilient these animals are. So this male Blandings, he didn't have a left arm or leg. So he somehow lost them either to we're assuming predation, but could have been other reasons. So it just reminds me how amazing these animals are to lose those limbs and still be full and kicking and doing their thing. So I definitely love turtles for that. And finally, bad food decisions. So I love to cook, but also I feel like if you've ever done field work, sometimes you can get lazy when you cook. So we were starting our rotation of early mornings and late nights. We were doing a split shift. So if you've ever done a split shift, you know that can really mess with your appetite. So the very first day I made this wrap, and I love to eat wraps in the field, except I don't know if it happens to everyone else, but my wraps are soggy every time. So I just kind of got used to eating soggy wraps, but this wrap was different. So I cleaned out my fridge and essentially put everything in this wrap. It had hard-boiled egg, balsamic vinegar, cheese, all these weird things. But the first day I wasn't hungry, so I brought it back home, and then I did the same thing. And then on the third day, after it sitting in the hot sun and then going back into the fridge, I decided to eat it. And I ate the very first bite, and I thought, oh, this thing tastes kind of funky, but I'm going to keep going. And then halfway through the wrap, my stomach told me that if I keep going, I'm essentially going to give myself food poisoning. So if you ever are in a situation where you don't need to eat something sketchy, don't do it. And then I guess to just wrap up my talk, I want to talk about how it's really important to make the most out of every situation. So when you're working with with reptile habitat or with reptiles, I'm sure you know that there's definitely some really rough days where it's either torrentially pouring and you're still out there, looking at the vegetation, or there's so many black flies that you can't see 4 feet in front of you, or the deer flies are there's 50 swarming around your head. But there's always important to know that you're doing something great for this species, and they're just so amazing, and it's definitely worth that little bit that you have to give. And the best part about being an RA is that the awesome people you work with. So not only is the work memorable, but definitely the people are. So I don't think that my life as an RA would be as good as it was without the awesome people. They're so dedicated, and everyone has this very similar passion. So it makes the work so much more rewarding. So big shout out to McMaster Ecohydrology Lab for that. And yeah, with that, I just want to say thank you so much. I'd love to take your questions or comments. Just a side note on these memes. So every week, our lab, when you present, you have to present a meme. So here are some that I hope you can relate to if you do turtle work. And if you're interested in the Ecohydrology Lab and our research, you can check out that link below. But yeah, thank you so much. I'd love to hear your questions, comments, turtle stories, whatever. I would love to hear it.
Thank you so much, Hope. That was fantastic. So feel free to take a break, anybody who's watching, for a couple minutes and come back. We're going to field some questions in the chat here. I feel like that's the best way to do it. So if you have a pressing question, just throw it in the chat, or yeah, and we'll answer some questions.
I hope you all got a good look at my dog when he walked in as well.
Yeah, he was just kind of lurking back and forth in the background. It was hilarious.
Yeah, he loves to do that.
Got some great presentations in the chat here.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, I have a question to start you off, if you don't mind. Kind of a prerequisite question for anyone, in this field. So what's your favorite herp and why?
I feel like that's such a classic question, and I feel like I'm biased, so definitely turtles, but my favorite turtle species is really hard. They all have a special place in my heart. I feel like Blanding's turtles are definitely my favorite. I feel like that's a lot of people say that, and it's because they're smiley, but I think that painted turtles are also a second favorite because they're often forgotten and they're so sassy.
They are.
I think they're the sassiest turtles ever, and I kind of relate to that because they're really cute, but then they can have that little bit of like feistiness. So they're definitely a close second.
I think we got a 2-in-1 there. There was another "What's your favorite turtle?" question, so we answered that one too. You can see the chat here, right? Do you want to just answer them as they come in?
Okay, so we have one that says, do I assume that turtles can breathe through their skin? And I think I saw another one that says they can also breathe through their butts. So yeah, turtles will breathe through both their cloaca and their like within their mouth when they're overwintering. So it's kind of funny that they butt breathe in the winter, but yeah, they do it through within their mouth and within their cloaca. And then next question is, does pH have any effect of turtle overwintering preference? If you are not sure, any ideas? So that's a really great question. And I'm actually not sure because, so within Eastern Georgian Bay, these bogs are like poor fens, they're often a little bit more acidic than like other sites. But we are finding turtles, like many different species, overwintering in these bogs and poor fens. So I feel like pH might have something to do with the dissolved oxygen content. So this is just like, I'm just spitballing, just thinking that like maybe these sites that have a lower pH, like they're more likely to have anoxic tolerant species versus the sites that like have higher pHs. So say rivers or lakes are more likely to like support those non-anoxic or the normoxic species. So wood turtles, things like that. So yeah, that's what I was thinking with that. But that's a great question. I feel like that would be a really interesting research question and a really great way to like link biogeochemistry and herpetology. Okay, another. Oh, so can you talk about the rescue facility? So I'm assuming you're talking about the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre. So if you don't know what the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre is, it's an amazing facility within Ontario that take injured turtles and they essentially do their best to rehabilitate them so that they can be released back to their home wetland. They also do education programs. And so if you ever find a turtle hit on the road, you can call the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre hotline. And they will, you can either drive it there or they'll get a turtle taxi. And then those people within the OTCC will help it. And if the female turtle unfortunately is dead, they can harvest the eggs and incubate it. So one important thing is if you ever find a turtle on the road, don't assume it's dead because these turtles are super resilient. Like I was saying, when they lost that one turtle who lost his arm and his leg, they can withstand some pretty crazy things. So just because, this turtle looks pretty gruesome, the chances are they might still be alive. So never give up on a turtle, always call. And if for whatever reason they are dead and it is a female, they can harvest those eggs and give the babies another chance. So I really love the OTCC. You can check out their website. They have a lot of great resources on their website as well. So the next one is, what is the turtle species you find most often in the ecosystem? I feel like it's really common to see painted turtles. So painted turtles love to bask. I feel like they're like basking obsessed. So basically I feel like even within the GTA, not just Eastern Georgian Bay, but if you're in and around a wetland and you're looking on logs and you see these shiny little things that look like rocks, it's most likely a painted turtle. So I feel like painted turtles are definitely the most common that you'll see. The next question is, how do you pronounce niche? So I pronounce it niche. Is that incorrect?
No, that is
really random
definitely
question.
Yeah. Oh man, it's definitely niche.
Is
You
there an
got it.
argument trying to be settled?
There is.
Habitat
I
niche,
think the
I
other
guess.
pronunciation that people use is like niche. I think
Oh,
that's the other one. I hate it.
I don't
But
think that's
yeah.
for me.
No, me neither.
Okay, the next question is, when you're in the field, how do you record water temperature? So there's lots of different ways to record water temperature. There's so many different amazing data loggers out there. So for my research, I'm using these things called hobo pendants. So there are these really cute data loggers. They're about a size of an Oreo cookie, and they can be programmed to take water level or water temperatures however frequently you want and forever how long you want. But there's tons of other options as well. So there's Campbell data loggers that can be programmed, different things like that. But yeah, I'm using hobo pendants. Next is, in your research, have you noticed a preference in overwintering substrate? That's a great question. So basically in all the study sites that I work in, they have really mucky, like rich organic matter bottoms. So I haven't worked, largely my research is all based in Eastern Georgian Bay. I've done a really small amount of work in Long Point, but or like within Southern Ontario. So other than that, I only see that really rich mucky sediment bottom. Okay, next question. Oh, yay, I love seeing a turtle story. So we have a turtle story. So Suzanne says that she volunteered to find wood turtles in college through radio telemetry. We weren't supposed to get wet, chase a wood turtle back and forth across trees that were down over a stream for an hour. Then I slipped and was wet, so I swam across the stream, and then I got her. Turtle was 532 and will always be my turtle. I love those turtle stories of how like you give her for a turtle. So I guess I have one when I was working in Long Point. We were, canoeing, and it was a long day and the weather was really cold. And there's this really amazing turtle just sitting like right at the edge of the canoe launch. And there was 4 of us in the canoe. We had packed in the canoe. And the water was probably only like 1 foot or probably 2 feet deep, but the muck was super deep. So I launched myself out of the canoe and I just hit the muck and I just like fell flat over because the muck was so deep. So yeah, I love turtle stories like that.
Yeah, that muck will get you.
Yeah, it got me for sure. Okay, so Miss Armstrong's science class says, what are you working on right now for your project? Are you going into the field? So if it wasn't, so due to COVID restrictions, McMaster University and the provincial lockdown, I'm unable to go into the field. But if there was no COVID restrictions, I would be going bi-weekly to collect dissolved oxygen data at my, we call them my profiles. So it's basically just a spot within the wetland where I chose to instrument. But when I'm not in the field, I'm working on a lot of like reading the literature, looking at different things, but mainly reading the literature, and I have some courses that I'm working on. So yeah, mainly stuff like that. So Brittany asks, how long are most of your field days, and do you ever have to do longer stays, i.e. overnight? If so, how long and how do you prepare? So it's really different depending on who you work with and where you work. So, and it also depends on what you're working on. So within the Ecohydrology Lab, we work 10 days on, 4 days off. So we'll be at the field house working for 10 days, and we'll have 4 days off. We'll try to work 8 hours a day, but sometimes it could end up being like 10 or 12. Sometimes it may be 7. But for those like really long days, I've actually never had to like hunker down within the like actual ecosystem because we have that place that we stay. So we just trek on back there. But how to prepare for long days, I feel like you can never pack enough water. I think I can't carry enough water that I need to drink. So I think carry as much water as you can, but not enough that it will break your back, and carry all the snacks. So I always have like by the end of the summer, like 5 like paper thin Cliff bars in my backpack that have been weighed down. So definitely all the snacks, but yeah, I feel like a lot of it is just mentally preparing, saying like, I'm working on this habitat and I'm working to help conserve this species. So if I have to put in a 12-hour day, like that's what I'm gonna have to do. But yeah, definitely snacks help, and ice cream at the end of the day. And then, do you have any advice for grade 9 students interested in getting involved in volunteering? Yeah, so there's lots of opportunities to volunteer. It really depends on where you're located, but if you're located within like the Hamilton region, that's where McMaster is. So there's the Dundas like turtle people. So they will do surveys for nesting turtles within June. So you can volunteer with them. There's also Ontario Nature, there's opportunities there. And if you live within like the Peterborough area, there's the Ontario Turtle Conservation Center. But also if you're interested, not just with turtles, this is a little plug side note, if you're interested in helping with chorus frog surveys, Blazing Star Environmental is looking for volunteers to do chorus frog surveys. So that would be a really great way. You can just go to your local wetland and you listen for frogs. So that's a great opportunity to get involved.
I can send over that link to Ms. Armstrong as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kenny says hobos are great. Yes, I agree. They're awesome. They're so small and so easy. Ms. Armstrong again says, when did you start getting into turtles? What is the longest time you've stayed out in the field for? So I started getting into turtles when I worked at Grundy Lake. So that was the summer of my second year. So I think I had just turned 19. So I was pretty late to the game. A lot of people start like catching turtles and snakes and doing fun herp stuff when they're really little. But yeah, I just, for some reason, never did. But as soon as I got that exposure to it, I became like really obsessed. So it's never too late to start. But I think the earlier you start, the better, because it's really awesome. So you get to do that for longer. And what was the longest time you had stayed out in the field for? Oh, that's a hard question, and I'm not sure. I've done some pretty long days. I feel like 12 hours is not the longest, but I feel like 12 hours is a good one to say. Probably 12 plus hours, but it's worth it in the end. And then another question is, how has the lockdown denied you access to open wild spaces to continue your fieldwork, recording/data collection? Folks can still walk dogs. Why can you not go walk to turtle site? It's a really great question. So basically, McMaster University, for fieldwork protocols, because what I'm doing is I'm leaving Hamilton and going to Eastern Georgian Bay. So I'm going outside of my region. So due to like travel restrictions, I can't leave my region for that. And also because we're operating under this like academic institution, we have to make sure that we're withholding those like super standards so that we don't go into that community and expose them to COVID. God forbid that happens. So yeah, we just have to be super careful and follow all those restrictions so that we can get out there sooner than later. So hopefully sooner.
Awesome. And with that, I think we're going to stop taking questions now because we're almost at the end of our time. So we have some thank yous coming in, and thank you from THS and myself. That was a fantastic presentation. I think that's by far the most questions we've had. So that's awesome. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. And we hope to see you at the next one. So yeah, everyone enjoy your week and your weekend, and we'll see you next month for another installment of Herpetology from Home.
Thank you so much, Jordan, and the rest of the team for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I have something to add about volunteer opportunities if anybody's interested.
Sure, that's great.
There's one thing called the Land Between. It's an organization that does a lot to do with reptiles and amphibians as well. And if they do species at risk or just a general like volunteer opportunities for people, and they hand out papers, and you can just go out and report all of the sightings you see of things and give them into them for information they can use for studies and such. And there's lots of local organizations for different counties as well that'll probably do similar things. So if you just go onto the Land Between website or your local county website, you might be able to find opportunities with that.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Matt. All right, so I think with that, I'm just gonna And the Zoom call. Thanks again, Hope.
Thank you so much, Jordan.
And hopefully that recording came through. Otherwise, I'll just match the slides to the audio recording and it'll still be posted either way. So
Sounds good.
awesome. Okay, have a great day, everybody.